Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's going on in the war in Ukraine, and specifically to talk about the election of Donald Trump, because I've had lots of messages over the last 24 hours from people saying to me, now that Trump's been elected, the war in Ukraine is virtually over, it's going to finish immediately, so stop posting videos talking about Ukraine, nobody's interested, let's move on. But I don't actually think the situation is as cut and dried as that, because obviously Donald Trump doesn't take over the presidency until the 20th of January, unlike most countries around the world where you have an election and then the people who win the election take over immediately. In the USA, there's a 2.5 month delay between having the actual election and the new guy taking over. So Trump won't actually be in power until the 20th of January. So the situation is going to remain exactly as it is until then. But also, there are question marks over whether or not Donald Trump will be able to deliver on his promise that he will end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. Now, he never gave any details as to how he was going to do that. And this was actually around 18 months ago that he first said that he could stop the war in 24 hours. However, in both of the live TV presidential debates that Donald Trump took part in, he made reference to ending the war quickly. So let's hear firstly what he had to say when he had his debate with Joe Biden.
I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
So he was categorical there that he will end the war in Ukraine before he even becomes president. Now, no details have been provided as to how he's going to do that. But let's hear what he had to say on the subject of the war in Ukraine when he had his live presidential debate with Kamala Harris.
We're in for $250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III.
So he's made a number of interesting points there. The first point that he made was that Europe hasn't pulled its weight in terms of the amount of aid that it's been providing to Ukraine. The USA has given a lot more money, according to Donald Trump, than Europe, and he wants the situation equalised. So if the war in Ukraine does carry on, the indication here is that the USA won't continue providing large amounts of aid until Europe has caught up with the amount that the USA has put in. So I think that's the first and very important point, because that's a clear indication that the USA under Donald Trump is likely to pull back on the amount of aid that it's giving to Ukraine. However, the second point that he made may well make that point redundant, because once again, he said that he's going to end the war in Ukraine before he even takes over as president. He's going to call Zelensky and Putin, have a chat with them, and everything will be fine. There are no details as to what he's going to say to them or what's the likely outcome of the negotiation is going to be, but he's very confident that he's going to be able to end this war before January the 20th. So I think that remains to be seen whether or not he can deliver on that. But I think the very interesting point that he made at the end was that he's referring to World War III. He's referred a lot in his presidential campaign to millions of people dying unnecessarily and the need to bring this war to an end. And it looks like introducing the concept of World War III is saying that this war needs to end, otherwise it could escalate into something that is far more serious for the whole of the world, but more importantly for the USA. And it will be interesting to see whether or not Donald Trump uses that angle to try to force Ukraine to agree some sort of settlement. Now, one of the difficulties that I have when I'm putting together a video like this is trying to work out the political bias of the articles that I'm researching. And today's sponsor, Ground News, that I've been working with for more than 2 years, is a fantastic resource because it allows me to be able to pull together articles from all around the world. It's a news aggregator rather than a news publisher, and it tells me the political bias of those stories. So if we take a look at some of the articles that Ground News has pulled together for today's video, you can see that they've sourced 157 different articles, including one where the Kremlin has stated that despite Donald Trump's promise, it will not be possible to end the Ukraine war overnight, and another which highlights the fact that Trump's victory could mean that the USA withdraws support for Ukraine. However, to balance that off, there is also an article where President Zelensky has said that he hopes that Trump's victory will bring just peace in Ukraine closer. Ground News has been really helpful in putting together today's video, and you can get the Vantage plan, which is what I use, for a 50% discount, which is the best deal that they've offered at any time in 2024 by using my link below or scanning the QR code on the screen now. Now, interestingly, it's been reported that the current administration under Joe Biden is rushing through an additional $9 billion worth of aid that is currently outstanding. So this is aid that's previously been approved by the USA that hasn't actually been delivered to Ukraine yet. And the concern is that if Donald Trump takes over, he may stop that Ukraine aid actually being sent. So the administration that's currently in power is trying to make sure that it's got as much money to Ukraine as possible before Donald Trump comes into office. And I think the concern here is that the USA could switch off the tap almost immediately as soon as Donald Trump takes over. And I think that's interesting because when you combine that with his comments about the amount that Europe have been putting into this, there is a real risk that Ukraine could start suffering from a lack of aid, particularly when you take into account the fact that the German government has now collapsed into chaos. And one of the reasons why that coalition fell apart was that the current leader, Olaf Scholz, was trying to introduce a new policy to increase the amount of aid that Germany is supplying to Ukraine. So there's a question mark over what's happening in Germany in terms of they could see a change of leadership very soon. The UK recently had a change of leadership, where the previous ruling party, the Conservatives, were replaced by Labour. And in France, the situation is similar to Germany, where there's a coalition government, which makes it difficult to get things approved. So the three largest economies in Europe have recently seen a change of government. And there is a risk here that if Donald Trump does pull back on all of the aid to Ukraine, that Ukraine could find itself running severely short, particularly if other countries in Europe aren't able to get things approved quickly. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the change of leadership in the USA is obviously a big turning point in terms of the relationship with both Ukraine and Russia. Donald Trump has been very clear throughout his presidential campaign that he will get the war in Ukraine finished. He thinks that he can actually get it concluded before he takes office on the 20th of January. He said that in both of the live presidential debates. So clearly, as a man of his word, he's going to have to deliver on that promise. But how he's actually going to do that will be very interesting because he said that he's going to call President Zelensky and President Putin, have a chat with them, and everything will be fine. Now, the strong indication from that would be that Russia will be given what it's looking for. Russia has said that it would only consider stopping the war in Ukraine if Ukraine concedes all of the ground that is currently occupied by Russia. And in fact, Russia has declared all of that land part of an enlarged Russia. It did that very early into the conflict. So in order to get some sort of settlement agreed within 24 hours, that's realistically the only way that Russia would agree to some sort of peace deal. But clearly that isn't going to sit very well with President Zelensky because he said right from the off that Ukraine will not concede the land that Russia has invaded. So we've got a Mexican standoff in terms of the two different positions here. But in terms of what Donald Trump said during his debate with Kamala Harris, he made the point that Europe hadn't paid enough in terms of aid to Ukraine, and it's likely, therefore, that the USA will turn off the tap. And I guess that's the risk from President Zelensky's point of view. If Donald Trump says to him, "We will not give you any more aid," then that would cause a major problem for Ukraine. And potentially he could try to force Zelensky to agree to some sort of peace settlement on the basis of where Russia is sitting now. But I think the big question here is, will that be satisfactory from President Putin's point of view? Will he be happy just to take the land that has been conceded by Zelensky? Or will he want Ukraine to come under Russian control? Is he looking for some sort of sovereign control over Ukraine? Or is he just looking to take that land? And I think that's one of the questions that nobody really knows the answer to until Donald Trump has that chat. So I think it will be fascinating to hear what happens when Donald Trump picks the phone up to Russia and says, here's the deal, what do you think? Whether or not President Putin will agree to what he's proposing, or if he pushes back. And if he does, what Donald Trump does then. Where does he go from there? Does he continue supporting Ukraine against Russia, or is the USA prepared to walk away and leave Ukraine just to be supported by Europe and the other Western allies? So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.